She's also worked as a social worker, an advocate, and an instructor, and she combines her expertise of and her expertise and experiences to make some powerful art reflecting the experience of mental health, among other things. So, Leslie, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure,
Or
sure. Hi.
Mitchell? Sorry.
Oh, you can call me Leslie. um, Thank you for the invitation. This looks like an incredible panel. I'm just reading who everybody is. I sort of laughed when somebody invited me because I was like, careers in neuroscience? That's not really me. But I get it now. I get it. These are very, very careers in neuroscience. So I love this. Yeah, I'm an artist. Neuroblooms is a project that's about making mental health conditions visible and beautiful. It started with original art. I was fortunate to have, right before COVID, an exhibit at the Stamp Gallery there at University of Maryland. It was incredible. I know that I talked to neuroscience students, don't remember your names, but I love the curiosity about the exhibit. It expanded to, I make these little enamel pins and patches. They are all based on, the patches are a little easier to see. They're all based on PET scans of people who are experiencing mental health conditions, and they really vary depending on the mental health condition. And I know that you all know a lot more about the science than I do. I chose them because I find them really compelling visually. And I also, obviously, the meaning behind them is very compelling as well. So thank you.
Oh, Hillary, you're muted.
Thank you so much for joining us. Next, moving across my screen, we have Dr. Richard Sima, and he is an accomplished journalist and researcher. He's a PhD in neuroscience from Johns Hopkins, and his writings have appeared in the New York Times, Discovery Magazine, Scientific American, and the American Geophysical Union's EOS. He's also works as a communications specialist at the Art and Mind Lab at Hopkins at the Brain Institute, and has been a researcher for Nat Geo's Brain Games.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so glad to be here virtually with all of you. So yeah, I'm Richard. I studied neuroscience as an undergrad and went to do my PhD shortly thereafter at Hopkins. And like I really enjoyed the brain. I was fascinated by like this thing in our heads that makes us who we are. And you know but as I was doing research, I realized I wanted to do more of the communications aspect of what science is, the process, and all of these discoveries in neuroscience, but also far beyond it. So when I graduated with my PhD in 2019, I made the switch to doing science writing, science communication full time. So I currently wear a few different hats in that field. I do freelance science writing about all sorts of things. I've written about geosciences, neuroscience, climate science, about poop knives, just random like animal behaviors for different publications. As Hillary mentioned, I also work at Hopkins still with a lab that focuses on how the arts impact the brain and could be used as therapies in the future, and try to communicate like those advances and those challenges to doctors, researchers, arts practitioners. I also have worked as a researcher for National Geographic's upcoming TV show, Brain Games on the Road, where I, sort of, fact checked and did research on the different cognitive biases or illusions, like the stuff that's going on in these like games that the contestants play. And finally, I most recently started a job fact checking for a Vox podcast, Unexplainable, which is a science podcast, and like diving into all these open questions of science. So I'm sort of running the gamut of, how do we communicate science and its processes to people who are not necessarily scientists, and making sure that they understand the importance of research and the wonders that like it exposes us to in the world.
Great, thanks. Such fun, important work. Our next panelist is Mr. Avi Litwack, and he works for NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association. And he uses his backgrounds in communication and design to translate information from scientists to a larger audience.
Thank you. I'm Avi. I think I'm not muted, right? And I work for NOAA, specifically in the fisheries. I work with fisheries biologists primarily, climate scientists. My role is to communicate to various audiences. That's the general public, academia, the Hill, and it's to translate what scientists want to say to the outside world. I started my career, my undergrad is in graphic design. I had a strong inclination towards art and being creative. And what I really liked about graphic design was the ability to apply your creativity to helping people communicate. So my field has been primarily in visual communication, and my role at NOAA is leading the visual communication products that come out of our office. I started at Time Magazine in my career, so I started in print journalism, and now I do a lot of web application, web design, still do print, create infographics, interactive media, video, whatever we need to do to get the message across. We take a lot of data, we translate the data into useful products that people can interact with. And why I chose this path was I really like puzzles, and I like being creative. And what drew me to this, no pun intended, or pun intended, was the practical application of visual design in the real world, as opposed to sitting and creating in your own space. There's a value to that, but the ability to sit and listen. And where I work now, I listen to scientists, and they have to educate me so that I can go out and educate and help other people. And I have a real passion for it. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. Next, moving across my screen is Dr. Emily Doolittle. She's an accomplished composer and researcher with a PhD from Princeton in composition. She's currently based in Glasgow at the Royal Conservatory of Scotland. And she is a zoomusicologist, where she actually incorporates animal communication in her music, which I think is a wonderful listen to. And she's been, I would say, probably dedicated to the sciences. I actually first met Dr. Doolittle, in a course for scientists. I was taking it as a postdoc in Denmark on animal communication. So welcome, Dr. Doolittle.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's great to meet you all. I'm going to share my screen because I prepared a very short presentation. Let's see, where are we? Okay. Sorry, trying to navigate multiple windows. Here they are. So I'm a composer and interdisciplinary researcher, and most of my interdisciplinary research is about zoomusicology, which is the study of the relationship between animal songs and human music. It's a very interdisciplinary field, so it involves drawing on scientific, musicological, philosophical, and other methods of understanding animal song and what it is about the songs that connects them to human music. And I just wanted to give a quick example of some of the ways I work as a zoomusicologist, looking specifically at how I've studied one species of bird in a variety of different ways over the past. I started in 2007 looking at the song of the hermit thrush. So I've been studying this bird in many different ways. I study other species as well, but I felt like this one was a good way of illustrating sort of the variety of the kinds of things I do. In 2007, I embarked on an interdisciplinary collaboration with 3 biologists, Bruno Gingras, Dominic Endres, and Tecumseh Fitch, to look at the song of the hermit thrush and what it is about the song that has made humans very interested in it from, as far back as you can find any writing about it. There's, sort of an obsession with the hermit thrush. We found that it actually follows, the song actually follows the overtone series, which is sort of a physical principle of sounds, where if you divide a vibrating column of air or a string in half, it goes up an octave. If you divide it in thirds, it goes up an octave and a fifth, and so on. I'll just play an example of this song. And as you hear this song slowed down, you might, if you are a musician or if you've ever heard the overtone series, you might be able to recognize it within the song. If you haven't knowingly heard the overtone series, if you think about the sounds made by something like a bugle, which is a brass instrument without any holes, they play the notes from the overtone series as well. So here's just a quick example. Full speed. So perhaps you can imagine that being played on a bugle. So when I embarked on this collaboration in 2007, it was my first time trying to work within the sciences. And I was like, look, the hermit thrush sings the overtone series, let's publish a paper. And my scientist friends were like, well, you can't just listen to it and say that it sounds like that. You have to look at lots of hermit thrushes, and you have to come up with a way of measuring them and showing statistically that it is doing that and not something else. So 7 years later, I co-authored my first scientific paper with these collaborators. And at the time, I wasn't planning to study the hermit thrush for 15 years, but there were all kinds of other questions uncovered that I couldn't really look at in a scientific context. So, So I ended up more recently reading a paper looking at cultural representations of hermit thrush song, and how, I've done research again going back about 200 years at how we talk about bird song. And you can see very clearly, looking through history, how people project cultural values onto animal songs. And the hermit thrush, for example, became sort of a symbol for American transcendentalists, and it represented solitude, a special connection with spirituality, and sort of exquisite musicality. And then finally, I also look at her song through my composition, and I'll just play 20 seconds of a piece, which is based also in the song of the hermit thrush. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Wait. Just in time for the dog to start barking. Thank you.
That was great. Is your next piece going to be based on dog barking?
It might be.
That
Sorry, that
was
was a short laundry-related emergency, but
thank you. So next, moving across my screen, is Dr. Greg Dunn. He earned a PhD in neuroscience from Penn, and he makes gorgeous art that really sort of showcases his love for the brain and the forms of neurons. He's also worked in collaboration with a physicist to create their own new technique for reflective micro etching. And his work is exhibited in a number of museums around the world. So thank you, Dr. Dunn, for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Hillary, for the introduction, for organizing everything. Calling you guys from Bulgaria, which somehow I ended up here. I went to did my PhD in neuroscience at the University of Pennsylvania, where I keep my studio. About a year and a half ago, my family and I moved here, and I'm continuing to work in this field, kind of the intersection of neuroscience and art here. When I was so I have a background in music, actually. That was what I studied for many, many years. And I changed my career over to visual art when I was in grad school. Mostly because I wanted an experiment that worked for a change. You know, as many of you who have academic backgrounds know very well, you can spend a whole lot of time on stuff and have absolutely nothing whatsoever to show for it. Not even a negative result, but just like an annoying, ambiguous result. So making a physical object, making a piece of art, and having that at the end of the day is always a really nice kind of bonus. So I did this to preserve my mental health initially, and I'd always had this artistic practice. I sort of figured out how to merge my two scientific and artistic interests into this. And by the time I finished my PhD, which was in the epigenetic transmission of feeding behaviors, so it's like how the environment changes the brain and how those perpetuate through generations, I decided that my contributions in the artistic world, in the visualization of the brain, would probably have more of an impact than if I were to have continued in straight up research. Like I was a reasonably decent researcher, but I don't think I was contributing something that others wouldn't have been able to. Whereas the kind of unique Venn diagram of my interests at the intersection was not something that a whole lot of people were particularly interested in. You know, like the physics of reflective surfaces, the like details of neuroanatomy, like the synthesis of Asian art with those things. It was something where I was able to find a niche for myself that helped me to communicate the complexities of the brain, which is the absolute fundamental common denominator that we all have every moment, making every moment of our experience possible right now. So it seemed like a very inclusive and all-encompassing topic to explore. So I'll quickly show you one piece that I've got here. This is a small version of the piece called Self-Reflective. The original of this is at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. Let me see, I'm not sure how well this is gonna work out, but basically what it is if you come into the breakout room, I'll show you a better video of this. You can kind of see it over in the corner here. I'll kind of focus on that because I've got a bunch of other lights on in the room. Basically what it is it's a finely etched, almost like a cousin of holography, which is illustrating how neurons and circuits actually fire in the brain. This is of a sagittal slice of the brain. This is a project that I did, again, with this my buddy and physicist, Dr. Brian Edwards. And really to help to give people a visceral understanding of what the brain is, how it works, so that they can use their own senses to understand it rather than look at a zillion annoyingly opaque charts and graphs, which is unfortunately how science is often communicated. So I will call it good for now. If you want to know more, I'll see you in the breakout room. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I have to say that I've been to the Your Brain exhibit at the Franklin Institute, where I'm assuming your piece is connected with, which is super fun.
Yeah, it's a fun exhibit. Great place to take kids as well.
Yes, that's how we went. And then, so last but very much not least, we have Mr. Asher Flatt. He's a documentary filmmaker and researcher, currently working for the BBC Natural History Division. He has degrees in zoology and a master's in communications. He has work that's been praised by David Attenborough, and I have to say that I watched the movie too, and I agree with David Attenborough. And so, Mr. Flatt, do you have anything to...
Thank you very much, Hillary. Yeah, very cool seeing your work, Greg. It's pretty incredible. And to be involved in such an amazing panel as well. Myself, I'm not actually a neuroscientist, although I was very interested in neuroscience in university and did actually dabble in the neuroscience of honeybees for a short time as part of my zoology degree, which was a lot of fun. But sort of decided that the communications aspect of science was more for me and meshed my interests better. So I'm actually originally from New Zealand, and that's where I did all my study, and then moved to Australia for a time and made the film that Hillary's talking about, which was about a very niche species of stick insect, which is native to an island called Lord Howe, which is a very beautiful place off the coast of New South Wales near Sydney. Should look it up if you get a chance. And from there, I am now living in the UK in Bristol, where I am working for the BBC Natural History Unit and working on currently a documentary about crocodiles, partly, which is how I met Hillary, because we've been talking to her about the science of crocodile hearing, which is very interesting. I believe that was the one, wasn't it, Hillary? I think, or
Yes.
dome pressure receptors, one of the two. Yeah, so she's very nicely provided her time, and I thought I could definitely do the same. And yeah, that is about me.
Great, thank you. And it didn't have to be reciprocity, but I appreciate it.
Not totally.
Yeah. So I have a couple of general questions, which we don't need to go through answers from everybody, but just we can jump in which panelists might want to answer it. What are the skills that you feel are essential for success in your fields?
I can answer this. Adaptability. The idea that your career will change. How you start is not how you will finish, and not that I'm even close to finishing, but that you have to be in tune with who you are, what your passions are, where you're being driven, and how the world is changing, technology is changing, perception is changing, and be able to adapt to it.
Anybody else want to add?
I'll say, I mean, zoomusicology, or more broadly studying the relationship between animal songs and human music, is such a broad field, and you can look at it in so many different ways that there's no specific skill set you would need to do that, but rather sort of figuring out what it is, what can you add to the conversation that somebody else isn't already adding. And I remember, around the time that I met Hillary, I think it was 2009, probably in Denmark, 2010. Do you remember which year? Anyway, I was just in the beginning of this collaboration with biologists, and I briefly went through a period of feeling sad that I hadn't become a biologist. But I quickly realized that if I was a biologist, then it would be great. I could do some things, but I would also have to, for example, channel almost all of my outputs into the format of a scientific paper, which is quite restrictive. I would spend a lot of time writing grants. There might be certain things I would understand or could do that I'm not able to do, but yet there'd be certain things I don't really want to do as well. And I realized that I actually really love my position as a composer and artist who has done enough reading about science and talking with scientists that I can collaborate well with scientists. So sometimes it's about thinking about who you are, what can you contribute, and then how can you get into the situation where you can have the conversations you want to have with people, so you can do something really interesting together. And stubbornness, you always need to be stubborn, and just, if you knock on one door and it doesn't work, then knock on another door, and eventually you'll find people who are interested in what you want to do.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that, because the word that comes to mind in the arts is tenacity. And stubbornness is sort of another corollary to that word, right? And because there's no one path through the arts. And I mean, there's no one path through any career, right? But the arts seem to be particularly vague that way and difficult, right? So tenacity is a quality that I think serves everybody well in the arts, any career, I would say, but also I'm a big fan of embracing failure. And I'm sure you talk about that in the sciences as well. It's really super important learning, very painful learning, but really important quality to have. And if you're lucky to work for employers who also embrace failure, which isn't always the case, then everybody will go far.
Yes. I fully agree with the failure thing. Like, actively seek out opportunities to fail, or, to try things that you don't know if they'll work or not.
Yeah, that's how you push yourself, right? Like, if you're always, like hitting home runs, you're probably not you're not growing really, maybe. So I guess like related to that is like having some humility, having curiosity to learn new things. There's always something that you won't know, and everyone can teach you something new. So as a writer, like I get to talk to all these experts in fields that I have no expertise in, no like real knowledge coming in. So I have to learn from them. I have to figure out the right questions to ask. I have to like be able to like be present and follow up and think of like, what does that mean? And how do I explain this to someone else who has to rely on me to like show them this aspect of the world. So being able to ask dumb questions because you want to make sure you're getting it right, I think is also important. And yeah, just being open to all that is out there.
I'd like to add one thing as well. Thanks all for your thoughts, specifically on the topic of tenacity, which is a great skill to a point. I've found that particularly when you're an artist who's making a living at your craft, and it's a matter of, does this thing sell or does it not sell? And your family having food on their table is sort of based around that. Knowing when an experiment, like a preliminary experiment with a risky idea, is going to work or not going to work, and developing a sense for that so that you can nip things in the bud early on. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be like trying out these experimental ideas, but that was for me one of the most valuable things I learned in the lab, is just how easily you can waste a lot of time by stubbornly pursuing an idea that is not giving you promising results in well-designed early experiments.
Great. Love the discussion. So another sort of general question about educational paths, that you've all sort of taken different ones, and not that they've led you exactly to your career. But do you have any thoughts on your own educational path, sort of how you chose it, and if you would suggest it for somebody interested in doing work similar to yours?
Yeah, well, for me anyway, I chose my educational path based on what I wanted to do in this career. And now it's sort of, it took twists and turns along the way, but I eventually ended up here. So yeah, I think just sometimes having a clear goal, but sometimes being able to like go off the rails a bit or go astray and explore some other things, and which I did numerous times as well. So
yeah, I can
You're good.
sorry. So many things have changed since I went to school 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, let's just say over. And in that, right, University of Maryland, College Park didn't have a computer, built up computer department. So I was told if I want to do graphic design, I was going to have to look at UMBC, take courses over at UMBC. But what I would say is that what I chose over 20 years ago is not what I'm doing today, and that learning never stops. And I think once you say, I've arrived, I'm good, and you will meet peers out there, that's when you stopped learning. So you don't arrive, you don't stop, you can learn from everybody, you can take courses, there's just so much out there. So your career or your educational trajectory only I guess blossoms as you continue in this world. So what I did then is very different than what I do now.
Yeah, I would also like heartily agree with that. I think I'm still relatively early in my career as a science writer, but it's like when I was in graduate school, I was taking workshops, I was trying to figure out how to get into science writing. And I learned from like reading other people's work, talking to people who have gone like a similar path that I want to take. So it's like, I hope to continue to keep that mentality that, you know, if I go into another like medium or try to tackle a different subject like that, I will continue to learn and seek out people who can guide me. And I guess like just going back to the question of like how I got into my career of science writing, it's like I went to graduate school hoping to become a professor who would do research and also write books for the general public, sort of like Carl Sagan. Like you're teaching, you're doing cutting edge research, but you're also like able to, you know, speak eloquently and compellingly to like a larger audience. And I found that actually like the research part is kind of a drag, as Greg said, like, oh, like stuff just doesn't work a lot of the time. And I enjoyed the communication and talking about science, thinking about the ideas more than like figuring out why I'm not getting any recordings of this brain. And it's because I didn't have something plugged in correctly. So yeah, it's not easier writing, but it's a different frustration that I approve of more.
Feel your pain, buddy.
I would say for myself, I went through a very straightforward academic route. I did a bachelor's and a master's, then a doctorate in composition. But I would say that what's really important, I actually think a doctorate should be fun. You should enjoy doing it. It should be really, I mean, it will be hard, but I think it's really important to choose an environment where you like working with the people you're working with and where you feel like you can pursue the things you're interested in. And I think because doctorates are hard, it can be really hard at first to figure out whether, like, is this the good kind of hard that is challenging me to grow and is sort of actually in the long term, you know, helping me as a person, or is it the bad kind of hard where I'm being demoralized and, you know, having barriers I shouldn't have. And I was really lucky to be in a situation where it was the good kind of hard. But I know people who, you know, were in the bad kind of hard situation. And if you start feeling you're in that situation, maybe don't stay another 3 years and see if it gets better. Maybe, like, you know, if you realize there's something wrong early on, see what you can do either to fix it or to put yourself in a different situation. I mean, I know, you know, there's all kinds of factors, so people don't always have the flexibility. The other thing I would say that I think is really important in the arts is, like, you know, so often in music, you hear people say, well, he's really hard to get along with, but he's a great musician, so you should go study with him. And then you have somebody who's like treated terribly for years. And the thing is, there are so many people out there who are great people, really fun to work with, really helpful, and also really good at what they do. So seek out the people who are actually good people as well as good at whatever it is you want to do.
I can't agree with you more, Emily. I think that's really good advice. That if you're ever in a dilemma where you're choosing project over people, or choosing between project and people, choose the people. That has been my experience. And most of the time, there is enough out there that's interesting that that you'll get hooked on something, particularly if you're working with somebody who's able to communicate that well. I also agree with you, Emily, when you say that it makes sense to kind of check in with yourself, particularly when you're going through grad school and you're going through tough times. For a lot of students that I went to school with, around end of year 2, beginning of year 3, when you start to embark on your own projects, is when reality really sets in, and you start to kind of experience some of the complexities. And that's a good time to be checking in with yourself as to if this is something that you want to pursue or not. And also, as you said, Emily, it's for some people and it isn't for others. And knowing when to stop is a really important skill, and when to know how to push yourself through some and break through some barriers for yourself.
As a less creative type, I also 100% agree. The importance of surrounding yourself with good people and making sure that you're doing what you want to be doing. So a number of you have talked about sort of your roles as communicators and communicators of science in your jobs. So what would you find the biggest challenge when writing, drawing, communicating about science to the general public?
I think a key part of communication is figuring out who your audience is and trying to get them, like, meet them where they are. And it's like when you're talking about science, like, there's so much complexity, and scientists are so used to speaking jargon because that's shorthand for these complex ideas that they have. So it's like, as a communicator, you first must break down that complexity for yourself so you understand it. And then you must also figure out what is like the level playing field that someone you're trying to like explain something to, like where they are. So you don't talk down to them, but you try to, like, you know, come to them as equal conversation partners. And that's challenging a lot of the time because you have to put yourself in the shoes of your audience, and you also have to make sure you're understanding what you're explaining as well. Because a lot of the times when I have difficulty writing, it's like, oh, actually, I don't really understand. Like, I need to sit down and like really make sure I have it clear so I can explain it clearly.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with Richard. You have to understand it, what is being conveyed to you. So if you can check your own ego at the door, it goes a long way, because a big challenge when you're walking into a room is that somebody has a research paper and they have put a ton of work into that research paper. They've spent months on it, and now they have to go through you, right? So you have the challenge there is you've got to get them comfortable. And it's a trust role, right? To say, I'm not inserting myself. I'm here to listen, and I'm here to absorb and understand. And if I can do that, I can help your research go further and reach more audiences. And I will not, and the other challenge is for you to not insert yourself. And that can be hard, but there is a time for your creativity to be at play, and that's after you have truly listened to this individual and understood what they're trying to convey.
Yeah, I would totally agree with both of you. My sister's a neuroscientist, and she studies schizophrenia with fMRI technology, and I have a very hard time understanding her when she talks about her research. And so I feel like that translation piece, like to think about it as literally translation from science to everyday language. And I happen to think that visual language is particularly lends itself to that. I think where I see barriers between what I do and people who look at what I do is that intimidation factor. I mean, you know, neuroscience is about the brain. You know, there's almost nothing more complex and intimidating for people who don't know anything about it. So that's, you know, my goal is to make what I do accessible. And that takes a lot of humility, because I also am not a neuroscientist.
Astrid, you communicate, it's not necessarily neuroscience, but you communicate science for a living. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with the others. It's, about taking something very complex and simmering it down to something more approachable and relatable. And I guess in my field, it's a lot about making, I guess, weaving information into a story, because obviously, like, information is more easily digested in a story form because that's sort of the universal language of humanity in a way. We all love a good story. And if you can just sneak information into something that's entertaining, then everyone will go away happy and maybe none the wiser, but a bit more educated.
Yeah, I agree. I sometimes think that or say that I almost try to like trick people into learning something about the brain. Like if you can hook their emotions, that's the way that everybody learns. You talk about the hippocampus and the cortex and all the circuitry that does it, but the thing that really makes you learn is it's your limbic system, it's your amygdala, it's your emotional kind of connection with things. So being able to harness that and make it exciting and interesting is super key. I've also noticed a lot that we all travel in our own circles. We all have our own echo chambers, and you see it in science all the time where people are using the jargon, as many have mentioned. I see a lot in experimental art as well, particularly like high-minded kind of philosophy styled, like ideas-based art. It's very, very easy to get so wrapped up in your own ideas that you forget that other people can't see into your mind and know exactly all these crazy things. They have no context for how the ideas are coming out. So starting from the beginning, and as Asher was saying, like telling a story is just a super effective path. And oftentimes it ends up, the more deliberate you are about it, the better it typically is. I find.
Thank you all for all of those answers and those great discussions. Time is flying by, so to get some of our students a bit more involved now, we're going to be starting the first of our series of breakout rooms. The way this will work is if you go down in your Zoom bar, you can click on and open the breakout rooms, and you can see each of our panelists is associated with a different room, and if you click on the little blue number by it, you can join there. If anybody has trouble, me and several other people can assist you if you need help. So we're going to have a 15 minutes section, and then you will receive a broadcast message, and either I'll be brought back to the center if we reorganize a little bit, or just be encouraged to try another breakout room. You don't have to stay the whole 15 minutes. You can jump around. But enjoy talking to our panelists, and then we'll just come back and wrap it up at the end. And I think our panelists are almost all placed in their rooms now. So we'll stop recording, and you guys should